think that one way this country can meet survivors where they are is early intervention immediately after school shootings or any type of shooting for that matter. I think the reason I was able to get over my PTSD within 5 years is because I immediately went into really intense therapy. And I think that intervention at the earliest time possible is the most important thing for survivors.
I wish that people knew that just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean that it isn't affecting us. And the same is true with if we are talking about it, it isn't because we're stuck in the past. It's because talking about it is key for processing and not forgetting, but just moving forward. There has to be an understanding that it's a lengthy process, and having the nation acknowledge all of those things, it just helps.
I found in my experience that a lot of people thought that I was very, very fragile, in which I was. But instead of leaning into the friendship or into me as a person, they leaned away as a way to protect themselves. And I think it's one of the reasons why so many people tell survivors of any kind of trauma, get over it, move on. I don't think that they're doing it out of any kind of malice in their heart. I don't think that they're supporting in any other way than they think will help. But there's this weird thing of when we travel through trauma to trying to get to that other side of the tunnel, and it makes people uncomfortable having to hear about it over and over and over again. You don't have to handle us like we are wrapped up in bubble wrap, even though for a period of time we might be wrapped up in bubble wrap, but eventually we will get over it in our own time. But it cannot be somebody else telling us that we need to get over it.
Think about what survivors went through and just think about ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to get involved. I think that they just need to stop coming to conclusions and thinking that we're okay versus not okay, or just being supportive of us. It's some tragic situation that we went through that's going to impact us the rest of our lives. 15 years later, I still have impacts from loud noises. If I see a mass shooting happen on the news or on social media, it still impacts me, even though the shooting I was in was more than 15 years ago. Just ask us questions, and we'll give you give our opinions based on the situations that we went through. We may not have answers to every question, but we could at least show from our perspective, being in that situation, what the moment is like when it happens to what the aftermath is like years later.
All survivors are at kind of different degrees of how it impacts them, and we're not the same. After the tragedy at Douglas, I had a phone call from someone close to me that told me that my son was not really a survivor because he wasn't in that building. It seemed like people want to rank your trauma, and it happened at the high school too, among the students. And if you weren't in that building, you were somewhat treated like you had no rights to be traumatized. I mean, what families need after a mass shooting is not a breakdown of the drama and ranking trauma all of the community. They just need support, not criticism.
Sometimes we look like we're functioning better than we are. And so there are many times where I'm really struggling, but people may not know that. So what I wish people knew is that sometimes we suffer in silence a lot because there's a lot of judgment on why are you struggling, because you should be over this, all of those kinds of things. And so making sure that people understand it's not just the day of the event that will be hard to go through. It's the week before. My shooting happened in the month of December. And so one of the things I struggle with is Thanksgiving, that week leading into that first week of December. And so if we want to really empower somebody to walk the journey and to become resilient, we have to make resources available, and we have to be able to provide services that meet people at the different points. We're really good about putting services in the beginning and kind of close to the middle, but when you start hitting these other year marks, those services dwindle. The resiliency centers that were there, that were funded, are no longer being funded. And so I think we desperately need funding from our nation's government to be able to support the long-term journey and not just the initial effect that these events have on people.
There's something about a mass shooting where when you survive and someone standing next to you doesn't, there can be so much confusion and so much heartbreak and just loss of identity, not knowing like who you should be anymore. I don't know. I think the only thing I would really for sure want to say is that, you know, a mass violence or a mass shooting survivor or victim has a lot to carry, and not everybody is willing to even confront it, you know, in themselves.
I definitely think that they could support us more by, like, again, not pushing us through the mental health system. People don't realize, just even though it happened 15 years ago, it still impacts me today. I just think they need to just like acknowledge us, just be there. Don't like tell us to get over it and move on, because we weren't physically injured. And that was the biggest thing when my shooting happened, is I wasn't physically shot. I wasn't physically hurt. And I was told basically to get over it and move on because I'm fine.
I think society can best support survivors by really fully understanding that grief and recovery has no timeline. It is not linear. It is different for everyone. And sometimes people are going to bounce around in that recovery journey. So one year they might, like the year mark, for example, might go smoothly. And maybe the next year, like 3 years later, it might be really rough. So knowing that there is no one way to work through this, and to fully understand that and know that like your friend or your loved one or the person that you're trying to support, it's just going to be different. And that's to be expected.
When another shooting happens, there are a lot of family members and friends who will reach out and say, "Are you okay?" Sometimes you'll want to talk about it and you'll want to open up and be vulnerable and cry. And sometimes you just don't want to hear about it and you don't want to talk, and you'll brush the person off. So a lot of people just may not understand that a survivor is going to act different at any given time. And it's not necessarily that they're mad at you or you're saying the wrong thing. It's just they're just dealing with it in their own way. You're going to feel weird about not wanting to say the wrong thing, but just the fact that you're there for them and you're listening and you're just in their presence and hearing them, it means the world.
To hear more from these and other survivors, visit the Supporting Mass Shooting Survivors website.